Welcome to Grand Sumo Breakdown,
the unofficial sumo podcast
for official sumo fans. Welcome to Grand Sumo Breakdown. This is Ryan. This is Jake.
This is Flerick.
This is Mac. And guys, something's been bothering me for a while. How can we say we are the unofficial sumo podcast for official sumo fans if we don't include other events from the local and international circuits? I mean, that just doesn't seem right. So there are other events outside of Japan where international sumotori compete, and not just at the US Sumo Open, which we have talked about on the show before. Organizations like the International Sumo Federation, the United States Sumo Federation, and even the Australian Sumo Federation, just to name a couple, want to bring sumo to the Olympic level of competition and have it recognized for the awesome sport that it is. I mean, isn't that cool?
Yeah.
I think it's cool enough that we should get Flerick in a Mawashi and get that on Instagram.
Ooh. Hang on.
Any excuse to get me in a Mawashi is good. A good excuse.
I was going to say maybe we make that a punishment, but it sounds like Flerick is just on board for this already.
But I want to know more. I wanted to dig a little deeper into this and find out, okay, what are these events and who are the sumotori that can compete in them? And we actually have a very special guest with us today for that. Introducing, based out of New Jersey, has been competing in sumo since 2013, medaled in multiple weight divisions at the US Sumo Open and Nationals, represented Team USA at the Sumo World Championships. Please welcome Ed Suczewski.
What's going on, guys? Thanks for having me.
Hey, Ed. Thanks for coming on to the show.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I'm a big fan.
Well, we can dive right into the questions if you want. Again, Ed, thanks for joining us. So let's start off with the obvious one. I'm sure you get asked this a lot. What got you interested in sumo wrestling?
Man, that actually goes all the way back. I remember the very first match that I ever saw in sumo. It was the 1997 Natsu Basho. They came down to the final day between Akebono and Takanohana. And this is back when I was a kid, when we were all kids. And they put sumo wrestling on ESPN from time to time. And actually, Akebono was the underdog, but I didn't really know it at the time. Takanohana looking like the little guy. It was like this David and Goliath battle. And he ended up losing twice in a row on the final day, unfortunately. But he put up a hell of a fight, and it was this crazy sort of David and Goliath battle. And I think that just grabbed my attention. The whole sport seemed larger than life, the raised doyo, the short matches, the immediacy of it. And I've been a fan pretty much ever since. And then, once YouTube came along and the internet, it was much, much easier to follow. And it's gotten easier and easier over the years.
And then I think it's safe to say once you started listening to the Grand Sumo Breakdown podcast, that's when your fandom really rose to the heights that it currently.
That's when I really started to understand the sport on a deeper level. Yeah.
Yeah. 20 years after seeing it for the first time, now you're starting to get it, right?
Yeah.
So Ed, if you started as a fan of Japanese sumo, what made you decide to compete on your own?
Well, I was a lifelong wrestler. Wrestled in high school, a little bit in college at the club level. I was coaching wrestling, and I just kind of had that itch to compete. And I saw how big the U.S. Open was getting. And actually, I had dabbled in sumo a little bit in college back when there was a club in New Jersey. But by the time I graduated, that club had, it wasn't around anymore. And so I just didn't think I had the chance. But I was, maybe 25 years old, and I kind of felt like this is now or never. So I just committed to finding a way to make it work. I actually signed up for a private judo lesson, walked in for my first lesson with a Mawashi, and I said, hey, I don't want to do judo, but do you want to try to figure out sumo with me? And that was how we started. A month later, I went to my first US Open, and kind of the rest is history. I had been a fan for so long. I didn't want to miss the opportunity to compete.
So I'm interested. You said you went to your first U.S. Sumo Open a month after you started sumo wrestling. Was that as a competitor? And if it was, how did that go?
I mean, I don't know if I was really a competitor, but I was there and I was in the ring. I got murdered. I think I went probably 2-5 on the day. I did manage to pick up a couple matches against some guys who were new like me. Got a lucky draw in the early rounds, but yeah, down the home stretch, I got beat pretty bad. But it was enough to keep my attention. It was a great day competing out. This is before the U.S. Open got so big that they had to move to an indoor arena, and we were outdoors under the sky. It was a cool sport, and I knew that it was something I wanted to stick with. And actually, 6 months later, I was in Japan training at Nichidai, and I really committed at that point to getting better.
You said Nichidai, is that a sumo university in Japan?
Yeah, that's Nihon University. So, I mean, in my opinion, probably the top sumo university in Japan.
Okay,
that's really cool. You said they used to be outside. That's kind of like old school sumo roots right there, like out under the sun.
Yeah, that was awesome. I mean, now there's 4,000, 5,000 people in attendance, so it's a little bit tougher to find an outdoor space that accommodates. But maybe one day. So,
what kind of training did you get when you were over in Japan that's kind of different than what you got in the U.S.? Well, for one, it was my first time on the real clay. But I think probably the biggest wake up call was just how violent real sumo is. I had only trained with this judo guy, so it was a lot of like catching each other by the belt and trying to wrestle and that sort of thing. And actually, I don't know if you guys know a judo wrestler, Kizaki Yumi. Yeah, he's the guy that got dropped on his head a couple basho ago, correct?
Sounds about right. I don't remember exactly, but he was only a freshman at the time, and he was coming off of being a Japanese national high school champ, and they put us in there with him for like 30 straight matches, and he was just burying his head in our chest over and over again. I was just trying to escape the ring basically without serious injury, and that opened my eyes to well, this is about contact, not just grabbing the belt and wrestling. And so it taught me about that whole real Japanese style of sumo and coming forward, that sort of Densha Michi approach.
Is landing on the clay as unforgiving as it looks?
Yeah, it's surreal. Like coming from America, you're used to wrestling on mats. That clay is like a little bit harder than a tennis court, maybe a smidge softer than a garage floor, but it's rough landing on that. Yeah. Yeah. You know what though? You learn to land correctly real quickly because you start getting your knees and elbows scraped up, and you learn not to brace yourself so much.
Would you say that has influenced your fighting style? Like, do you find yourself doing more of a pushing style, or do you primarily work the belt?
Oh yeah, I don't think I really did real sumo at all in those first 6 months until I went to Japan and saw what it's supposed to look like. I mean that straightforward attacking style of sumo, I think is what I try to do. I think probably most people would think of me as more of an Oshi specialist. I think probably my Oshi sumo is a little overrated. My Yotsu sumo is a little underrated. I think I'm a little more balanced, but hey, I definitely try to go forward and push guys out. So Yorikiri, Yoshidashi, I keep it pretty simple. And I think that tends to be the best approach. Some guys, they come in and they want to do judo in the sumo ring or wrestling in the sumo ring, but that you can catch some wins against low level guys. But if you want to really win against the best, you got to do true sumo and really kind of dedicate yourself to the way of sumo.
Enho, are you listening? Enho, are you hearing this? You can't always wrestle.
I mean, I think that Enho thing's a conversation for another day.
I'm sorry, but when he goes in like that and he tries to go for the actual wrestling move, it's like, okay, no, listen.
Yeah, I don't know though. When you're like 5'6" and 100 kilos, yeah, I don't know.
There's only so much you can do when you're his size.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what's the difference between? And I'm sure there's very vast and varied, but the difference between training, like the Japanese training that you did when you were over there versus like kind of the training in America, because like I know they do like weightlifting in Japan and stuff like that, but they also do a lot more like the traditional shiko and slapping bamboo poles and stuff like that. Do you see like a big difference between America and Japan like that, or is the training fairly similar on both sides of the ocean?
I think I think the training is getting more and more similar. Like I've taken back a lot of what I learned in Japan, and I run very sort of traditional practices. I still did Shiko this morning. I do all that kind of traditional training exercises. I do think you see in America some guys kind of getting more creative. Like Dark Circle Sumo does all kind of crazy stuff with sandbags and different creative techniques that Justin Kizar comes up with down there. But I think you see that in Ozumo as well. Just maybe not as widely publicized, but they lift weights and they do other kind of creative training too. So I think overall the training is probably getting more and more similar as people from the U.S. get more experience training with Japanese.
So moving on, kind of back to your sumo fandom, have you actually ever been able to attend a basho in Japan?
No, never a basho in Japan. I wanted to, but all of my sumo trips or all of my trips to Japan tend to be sumo trips. So it's either like world championships or training, or I actually went to Japan on my honeymoon, but that was rolled up with a world championship in Taiwan. So I'm sure
your wife loved that.
Yeah,
Oh, that's awesome.
Exactly. I'm sure my wife would have loved it if I dragged her to another sumo event. So, but I did get to witness my very first trip to Japan. Before I went to Nichida, I had like a day or two to explore, and I did get to see a practice at Hakakubeya, and that really, before I got in the ring with Kizaki Yumi later on, that really opened my eyes to sort of the violence of sumo. And here I was about to go and train at Nichidai for the next 3 weeks. And I'm like, oh, whoa, didn't know that this is how the sport looked. It's a sport that really doesn't translate that well on television. Like you don't realize just how hard they hit until you see it in person.
Yeah. When we were at the Nagoya Basho last year, for the very early matches, we were up in the front rows because nobody else had showed up yet. And just the sounds are so much different, so much louder, so much more violent once you're there up close and in person. It like you said, it really doesn't translate over the TV as well.
Yeah, the speed.
So who are some of the sumotori that you watch most on the Japanese circuit past or present? So you mentioned like Akebono, Takanohana. Did you kind of latch on to one of those guys or both of those guys when you were younger?
Yeah, I really liked Takanohana. Looking back, I should have been rooting for my fellow American and Akebono, but I liked the little guy. The little guy trying to overcome the big guy, and I liked that Yotsu style and trying to work for the belt. And Akebono, when I was young, was still like pretty much just a pusher thruster, at least for those first couple of years. So yeah, I really liked Takanohana. I was a huge Harumo Fuji fan. Man, a lot of people like pick favorites, but I always have a tough time rooting for one guy or the other in sumo. Like I'm kind of strange. I just like to watch. Like I almost like everybody. I really loved Kisana Sato when he finally made Yokozuna, and especially when he secured that second Yusho in a row to kind of legitimize his claim on the rank. And then looking back through history, I mean, I like Chiyono Fuji. I really like Taiho. I mean, Taiho is so big, it's kind of hard for me to emulate that style or anything like that. But I like his calm, like always calm and very present approach. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people all throughout history that I like to watch.
So do you go back and watch like a lot of the all-time greats, watch as many of their matches as you can, try to pick up some stuff to use in your own game?
Yeah, absolutely. I watch everything I can on YouTube. I wish there was like a collection of every single basho throughout time, and I'd probably go back and become like a real sumo historian. But I don't have access to that. But anything I can find on YouTube, I'll watch. Yeah.
Very cool. Speaking of other sumotori being involved in like the international circuit here, did you ever meet or train with Biamba?
Yeah, I trained with Biamba a few times actually in Van Nuys, California. And if people don't know, I'm sure your audience does now, but sadly Biamba passed away a little bit earlier this year, just a few months back. And man, Biamba was such a great person for the sport, and especially people think of him as sort of this ambassador that was on TV and made the sport visible to fans. But Biamba was a great person for the people in the sport too. He had this way of like being so gentle with you as he would give you advice, and then so incredibly violent with you in the ring. And And he would slowly ramp it up too. So like the first match, it would be a delicate slap, and you'd start to feel confident, like, all right, I can handle this. And he wouldn't come that hard, and then a little bit harder, a little bit harder, a little bit harder, until he's just smacking you in the face as hard as he can every tache eye, trying to kind of throw off your balance. And he was just a great person to train with like that. And I guess I'll never know if I really felt the full force of a Biamba tachi. I never faced him in competition, but in practice, he had that way of kind of building your confidence and then destroying it.
That's really funny. I mean, especially since he passed, I love talking about Biamba. He seems like he was kind of an Andre the Giant figure, where everybody who ever met him has a funny story about him, or like has fun things to say about being around him. That's really cool. Yeah. So you said you trained with him. What other kind of training groups do you? How does sumo training work together? Like, obviously, we don't have full on barrack style heias here in the U.S., but how does training as groups work?
Yeah, thank God for that. I love the guys I train with, but I wouldn't want to live in the same room as them 24/7. Yeah, we train. We have a club in New Jersey. So like I said, I started by basically asking a judo guy to try to figure out sumo with me, and he actually went on to represent the U.S. at a couple world championships as well. And over the years, different people have sort of come and gone into the club, but we train regularly in Madison, New Jersey. It's a martial arts gym, and they've sort of just added sumo to their regular offerings. And every other club around the country sort of has a story somewhat like that. They find a place to train, or they train outside, it's sort of like a if you build it, they will come type of thing. There's guys out there that just don't know it exists, but once you get it going, it just takes one or two guys. Once you get it going, then other people will start to gravitate towards it.
So outside of the Japanese, and you kind of mentioned this a little bit, what are the big differences with sumo here in the U.S. and say internationally?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is probably the fact that you can compete with weight classes and that women can compete as well. So it's one of the big limitations in Ozumo is that it's really just one open weight class, men only. So for people with different types of bodies and people of different sizes to be able to compete is one of the great things I think about international sumo. I think that's also beneficial for people who want to be involved in the sport, but maybe don't want to gain all that weight. I certainly am glad that I don't have to do that. And also, you don't have to move to Japan at a young age, live a military type lifestyle in a stable. It's much more like the way we think of any sport. You live a life, you still have a house, you have, a family, but you can, train and compete without necessarily committing to the whole military lifestyle of Ozumo.
What about the matches in particular? I know there's some differences, but you try to keep the same feel during the individual matches, but I know there are some different rules, right?
I think the rules are essentially the same. The only different rule I could think of is in international sumo under IFS rules, you can't slap the opponent with a slap that's sort of like a haymaker. So you can slap, but you have to stay within your shoulders as you wind up for that slap. You can't wind up outside of your shoulders and then slap. The truth is, though, that kind of harite is not really a very effective move anyway. When you're winding up and throwing a haymaker, you might want to throw a short, quick slap. So that doesn't really change much rule-wise, but I do think you see a big difference in terms of the style of sumo that's practiced because you have these, 85 kilo, 100 kilo weight classes. So you have a lot more hand fighting and a lot more variety of technique being used.
So you mentioned the harite, you can't do the full haymakers. I think it's a kachiage, kind of like the forearm shivers. Are those allowed at all, or?
Kachiage is good to go. Yep, you can use them.
Another thing I was kind of interested about, because you mentioned there's a difference when you got to the university in Japan where guy was burying his head in your chest. Is there as much kind of head-to-head contact at the tachiais where both guys going down head first and bounce
banging
off each other's
the coconuts?
Yeah.
That used to be after I went to Nichidan. That was like my thing for a little while. It's all I wanted to do was just that head first contact. But yeah, it was pretty uncommon. And I'm not really sure why that is, but you don't see as much of that. You do see it, and I've still had some head to head collisions even recently, but you don't see nearly as much of it internationally. And I suspect some of that maybe comes from the fact that people do come from other sports. Eastern Europeans tend to want to catch and wrestle a little bit more. Same with Mongolians; they tend to be very much belt wrestlers. So maybe that's why you see a little bit less of that head-to-head contact. But I injured my neck, so I've had to change my style up a little bit and do a smidge less head-to-head. As I get lighter, though, it gets easier. Like I can't do head-to-head against someone who's 150 kilos, but someone who's like 100, I can do it.
So here's kind of a broad question, but just tell us more about the USSF, the United States Sumo Federation.
Yeah, so that's the sanctioning body for sumo all across the United States. So pretty much any U.S. sumo competition has to be sanctioned by them. They're a New Jersey-based nonprofit, although the current mailing address and office is in California. And they basically provide support for, all of these different member clubs, provide support and sanction different tournaments around the country. And they get really involved with the national tournament in particular.
So how many clubs make up the USSF? Like the different clubs and gyms, or is that kind of hard to pin down?
No, I mean, clubs come and go over the years. I would say right now there's probably about probably a dozen really, really active clubs. And then you probably have maybe 8 to 10 more slightly less active clubs that are registered, but maybe not doing as much. But there's sort of an ebb and flow. And so for a long time, I think you maybe had a dozen clubs, but there wasn't a whole lot of activity going on. Right now, the dozen clubs that are active are really active. And I think they're laying a blueprint for even more clubs to get involved. I think there's definitely been a big increase in interest and a sense that guys living out in Nebraska or Wyoming or somewhere where there is no sumo, they now have an avenue to get involved, sort of just like I did, find a training partner and build from there.
So you're saying that the only thing stopping me from having the sumo club I've always dreamed about is these three guys who are lazy and want to stay home.
These three cowards, exactly. If they step in the ring with you, you'll have your club.
It sounds like Flair's ready to get into a Mawashi. So
I know, exactly.
Luckily, we have the whole pandemic thing going on right now, so I have a perfect excuse.
I'm glad you used the word cowards there, Ed. I wanted to use that word, but I have to live with these guys.
You're too much of a coward to call us a coward?
Damn it.
So what are the major events that the USSF holds on a yearly basis?
Yeah, so the USSF sanctions a bunch of different events. I'd say the biggest one is the U.S. Nationals, or not the biggest, but to me personally, the most important is U.S. Nationals because that's what qualifies you to get to Worlds. And I mean, I think for me, that's the main goal is the World Championships. The biggest event and definitely the most fun event that I've been to is the U.S. Open in LA. That's where you get 5,000 people at the Walter Pyramid in Long Beach, and that's just they always put on a great show, and you get really, really top quality international competitors there. I mean, it's not unusual that the finals match there is a replay of the finals from the previous year's Worlds or something like that. You get really, really top guys going there, and then we've got other pretty big events. There's been the FitCon Sumo Cup that just came around in recent years, and that takes place in Salt Lake City. The Georgia Open down in Atlanta. You've got some Texas tournaments. There's some in San Antonio. There's a big tournament in Austin that's coming up. Obviously, everything's gotten kind of messed up with this pandemic. It's been Philly tournaments. So there's a lot of smaller local tournaments. But I'd say the big two for me are nationals and the U.S. Open, and then after that, you probably got the Georgia Open and the FitCon Cup.
Okay, so yeah. That was something I was curious about, kind of like the difference between the U.S. Sumo Nationals and the U.S. Sumo Open. So it sounds like Nationals is going to be Americans competing to qualify for World Championships in the future, and the Sumo Open is just kind of a exhibition sort of thing where anybody can come in and just kind of showcase amateur sumo.
Yeah, I mean, you could call it an exhibition in the sense that it doesn't qualify you for anything. But I mean, to me, a medal or a championship at the U.S. Open is sort of it's a big deal. It's
Like
one of
the
the
U.S.
biggest
Open in golf or
accomplishments.
something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. Outside of the World Championship, it's probably the biggest accomplishment you could achieve as an American.
Okay. Can you go into more detail about like the World Championships, how often they're held, where they're held, and kind of what goes into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the World Championships are held every year. It rotates, so different countries bid. There's a whole bid process. Different countries bid, and then those bids are voted on by the IFS board of directors. So this year was supposed to be in Poland. I think the Poland World Championship will be pushed back until 2021. And the only time World Championships aren't held is if there's a World Games that takes place in the same year. The same is somewhat true for the World Combat Games, but they canceled the last World Combat Games, so that's probably neither here nor there. The World Games in 2022 will take the place of the World Sumo Championships that year.
Okay. And so World Games are kind of like the Olympics sort of thing every 4 years, and it's like the highest competition, and then the championships are just a yearly thing leading up to it.
Yeah, you could say that. I wouldn't necessarily put the World Games above the World Championships. I mean, to me, it's sort of one and the same. But I think the IFS views that if there's a World Games going on, you're already getting every single country's competitors together, or I should say, every continent's competitors together to compete. So that just sort of takes the place of the World Championships that year.
Okay.
Are there ones to watch on an international level? I mean, obviously, everybody in the U.S. is top caliber, gonna win no matter what. But are there other individuals from, say, other countries that are, the big gunners to go for?
No, to be honest, I don't really think too much about different competitors from different countries. There are people that come back and succeed year after year, but sumo's a crazy game, and in any given year, anybody can win. And so you see a lot of guys that are expected to do really well, and they can fall pretty far in a single year. It's just kind of the nature of sumo.
So there's no amateur hakuho who dominates everybody at all times. It's more of an open field.
Definitely an open field. I mean, you have people that come through and dominate in a single year, but year in and year out like that, some guys have had success, but no, there's no international hakuho. At least not yet.
Keep working on that. So where do you see teams out of primarily? I mean, we have here in the U.S., is there like others from, like we mentioned before, Australia, another international Japanese team? Like, where do competitors come from primarily?
Yeah, the most successful international teams historically tend to be, Japan, obviously, Mongolia, a lot of the Eastern European countries, Russia, Poland. I have this theory that if you live in a place that's really kind of nice and pleasant, there's really no need to do sumo. You would just be, sipping a margarita on the beach. So it's all these cold and brutal places, New Jersey, Poland.
Yeah.
Those are the places that produce sumo wrestlers. So it's kind of all those places you'd expect.
I read a textbook about that topic. I believe it was called Dune.
Yeah, historical facts, that book.
Yes, exactly.
I'm glad you mentioned New Jersey as just a terrible, like a place where not much going on. So
yeah, I'm ready to jump ship and go join that Panama City Club.
So if someone wanted to get involved with being a sumo tori here in the U.S., where can they go?
Yeah, so there's actually a sort of section of the USSF website dedicated to that now. If you just go to ussumo.org/starting sumo. ussumo.org/starting sumo. Let me just check that actually. Is there a hyphen? Yeah, it's starting sumo. Maybe you guys could, maybe we could get rid of the hyphen. I'll ask you about that.
I just typed out the word hyphen because I'm an idiot.
The other thing, though, if anybody just searches, USSF starting sumo, it should be pretty easy to find. And what's good about that page is it kind of gives people like a step-by-step list of things they can do, steps they can take to either join a club or start a club. There's a map to help people find active clubs in their area. there's a whole bank of different resources, just videos on how to do Shiko, different training tools, even documentaries just about how the sport works. It's the kind of stuff I wish I had when I started the sport 7 years ago, at a judo gym, just trying to figure things out. So there's a lot of resources out there. And then the other thing I'd recommend to people is try to connect with other sumo clubs online. It's an amazingly solid community that we have, and guys are willing to help you. You go to these tournaments, ask questions, be respectful. Guys are willing to talk to you and give you tips and things like that. And the same can be said for online. If you search hashtag starting sumo on Instagram, you can find some different people right now. Posting has kind of dried up a little bit because guys aren't training as much, but you can still find clubs that have posted before with that hashtag. Reach out to them, ask them how they do things, and you can learn a lot just from connecting to the community.
Taking notes, Flerick?
Oh yeah, definitely. No, I just really kind of like the idea that there's a resource. Like if there's an area that doesn't have much sumo going on, like you can kind of have the starting blocks of how to kind of get something going if you just get like another buddy.
Yeah,
and stuff together.
And we're always adding more to it too. So as more clubs put out content, Takeshi Amitani just put out a bunch of training videos from Japan. He's a wrestler who was a team captain in Nichidai and came over and trained for a long time here. He just put out a bunch of training videos. So we're always adding more to that too. So there's a lot out there for people to learn from.
Yeah, it's good. It sounds like as like more people go over to Japan to kind of try to figure out the secrets of sumo, like you're just kind of bringing it back to the United States. Like I figured this thing out. Let's do it.
Yeah, that's the thing about the world championships people don't realize. Like it's not just about the competition, but it's about that week leading up to that, training and competing with some of the best people in the US and doing joint practices with other teams. It's such a great learning opportunity. I've learned a ton from those world championships I've been to.
So have you noticed the popularity of sumo wrestling kind of growing in America with the amount of, or at least getting involved with it, with the amount of people you've seen, or how does that look right now?
It's probably impossible for me to tell because I live in such a sumo bubble. Like everyone I know is sumo. It's the only reason I use any social media is sumo. So yeah, I mean, it seems to me like sumo is exploding in popularity. But I do think that compared to maybe 7 years ago, certainly compared to when I was a kid, and I saw sumo for the first time 23, 24 years ago. I do think that culture has changed in the sense that I think we're a lot more interested in different countries, different sports, different sort of activities. And I think there's a much lesser tendency to just dismiss sumo as fat guys bumping bellies. I think I've seen a lot more interest, or at least just curiosity. So I don't know if the popularity is exploding, but I think people are more and more curious. And then there's, some little things that have gone viral over the years, that Takanoyama video of, little 100-kilo Takanoyama throwing guys. So things like that, I think, have opened people's eyes to sumo as well and shown them different aspects of the sport.
There was that amazing kids tournament match maybe a year ago or so, whenever that was, that one tiny kid versus like what looked like a bigger, tougher, like 10-year-old or 7-year-old or somewhere in there. But like that one, I remember seeing that pop up all over the place when that one happened, not just within sumo circles.
Yeah, that's a great event too. I think that was at the Hakuho Cup. And we've actually got a small American team that goes there as well. Kenneth Heffernan and the Aloha State Sumo down in Hawaii. He trains a whole group of kids and brings them over every year. So, I mean, that's really like the next generation of sumo wrestlers coming up. I didn't start until I was 25, but you got some of these kids now starting at the age of 5. And I mean, they're going to be killers by the time they get up to the adult level.
So you told us a lot about sumo, amateur sumo in America, how it's kind of changed over the past couple of years, but you haven't really told us a whole lot about yourself and your accomplishments. What have you been able to do in some of these amateur competitions?
Yeah, so I've been a national champion twice now. No, 3 times. Sorry.
Many times I can't remember.
Oh no, you know what?
No, you know what it is? A national champion in 2 different weight classes. So in 2018, I was a champ at 115 kilos. Now at 100 kilos, thinking about going for a 3rd weight class. I don't know if that's going to be up or down, but we'll see. Won maybe 3 different medals at the U.S. Open in different weight classes. And I've had some limited success at Worlds. I haven't really had a World Championship quite go my way yet. I mean, I've won some matches here and there, but I'm feeling good about the next year. I mean, I think the kind of future is where I'm looking.
Do you have a favorite match or a favorite opponent?
And I don't think too much about the past. Probably my best win in terms of like overall quality. You could say my best win came in maybe 2016 against a Polish wrestler who was maybe number 2 in the world at the time. He's won multiple world medals. That's probably the best win you would say in terms of the opponent's experience.
So you've competed at a couple of different weight levels, and we've watched a little bit of a couple of U.S. Sumo Opens, and there's quite a bit of difference between some of the lighter weights and the heavyweights. Have you noticed like a big difference in like how the fights go in your couple of weight classes you competed in?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I really like the style at 115, and I really like the style at 100. It's a little bit quicker, and there's a little bit more variety in terms of what can happen, but it still very much looks like sumo. When you get down to like 85 kilos, it almost starts to look like a different sport. You have some crazy hand fighting. You have guys that are much better at maneuvering out of the way. So there's a lot more trickery and a lot less of that kind of straightforward collision. So that's why I really like the slightly heavier weight classes as opposed to the 85 kilo class in terms of my own competition.
Yeah, some of those lighter weight matches that we've watched, they look kind of like trained pro wrestlers doing choreographed judo and stuff like that. It's wild, but yeah, it doesn't have the same feel.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely respect the level of athleticism down there, but yeah, to me, it just doesn't quite feel like sumo. Not to criticize anybody at that level. I mean, people are doing great down there, but in terms of my own competition, I'm glad to be a little bit heavier.
I was going to say, you're about to upset quite a few Enho fans with that comment.
Mm-hmm. So if you're like us, and unfortunately we are in Iowa, and all the events that you mentioned before are not in Iowa, and if we are unable to attend, how can we watch these events?
If you kind of get in touch with the sumo community, and just start friending people, following people on Instagram, you'll be able to see when little tournaments host events. They're almost always live streamed somewhere, and it's not such a big community that it's hard to follow. So you'll tend to see links posted for upcoming events. But the USSF as a whole is trying to do a much better job right now, I think, of aggregating those different events and hosting them all in the same place. So if you stay tuned to the USSF website and sign up for the USSF mailing list, I would say in the next year, certainly before nationals, there'll be some more of a single source for all USSF events, sumo videos to be posted and streamed in one place. So it'll be easier and easier, I think, for fans to follow.
And how can fans support the USSF? God, I keep wanting to throw like 3 S's in there. How can fans support the USSF if they want to?
Well, as of maybe last month, the USSF just started selling gear online. So there's a merchandise store. Just go to ussumo.org.
Fleric is already looking.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
Oh, yeah. I already sent Fleric the link to buy Mawashis.
Yeah, so I mean, there's all kind of merch available for sale there, and 100% of the profits from that go straight towards the USSF, and most of that really goes to support the national team and sending the national team to world championship competitions. Just sign up for that newsletter and stay tuned, because there's always new announcements, new ways for people to get involved, and I would imagine that in the next couple months we're going to have some new things coming down the pipeline in terms of how fans can get involved and how fans can support the USSF.
And have you guys started selling customizable mawashi so you can put like people's face right on there, or is that something you're just planning to do in the future and then cut me into the profits?
Now that you mentioned it, I like that idea.
Yeah,
it's got some legs.
I just realized how much I've always wanted a mawashi with Ryan's face on it.
Right?
Now, where would you put my face, the front or the back? That's the question.
Well, details. We'll work that out later. Ed, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a true pleasure to talk with you and learn more about sumo here in the U.S. and internationally.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Where can we find you personally on social media?
Oh yeah, you can find me on Instagram at the real sumo ed. At the real sumo ed.
Opposed to that fake sumo ed.
As opposed to the fake sumo, some other guy out there was already at sumo ed, so I had to one up him.
And you're just assuming he's not like a real sumo tori, and you're just calling him out. There's a rivalry to be had here between Sumo Ed and the real Sumo Ed.
I'm ready for it. Tell him to bring it.
We'll make
I don't know about you
happen.
guys, but I'm stoked. We got all kinds of cool stuff going on here in the U.S. We got Sumo Tori all over the place. We got gyms. I mean, this is cool. Sumo's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is something, once we are allowed to go places again and congregate in large groups, I think that's something we'll definitely need to look for nearby local events and try to stop by and support the Sumo Tori at those events.
Yeah, we just have to start our own sumo gym so we can train up.
Claire, get on those Moashi.
Oh, yeah.
It's always been the inevitable conclusion of this podcast. Once we get started, Ed, we'll make sure that we bring you in here to get us started at some point in some fashion or other. Great.
Sounds good, man. I'll come by.
All right. Thank you, Ed, for joining us. If you enjoy this podcast, you can leave us a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast listening service.
You can find us at social media, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, Grand Sumo Breakdown.
GrandSumoBreakdown.wordpress.com is our blog.
If you have any questions, comments, or corrections, drop us a line at grandsumobreakdown@gmail.com or give us a call at 805-613-7866. That's 805-613-SUMO.
And coming up, we had mentioned in our Natsu Basho Has Been Canceled podcast that is not quite the case because we will be simulating that entire Basho. So keep an eye out for some podcasts where we kind of dive deep into how we're planning on doing that, and then our preview for our simulation. So stick around and stay tuned for those.
Thank you for listening to Grand Sumo Breakdown. Until next time,
Throw your salt high
and keep moving forward.